As our special guest on this segment, we welcome Southfield Police Chief Elvin Barren. Welcome to the show, Chief.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you are fresh off of the prayer march that took place at the Hope United Methodist Church. Just kind of give us an idea, an overview of what happened today.
Well, I was contacted by the church's organizers, Ms. Stewart, and she asked, could we provide a detail for the event? But I wanted to go a little bit further than that. And so I told Ms. Stewart, I want to stand with you. Allow me and city officials to participate in this event, because this is the time we need to show unity as a city.
Absolutely. And just based on some of the footage and just the people that came out, it was such a amazing and inspiring event. Perfect day, hundreds of people there of every race, demographic, and an overall successful event. Now, you gave a speech at this event that I want to just sort of focus in on and use that as a basis into getting into our conversation. You had mentioned the fact that policing, community policing, oftentimes establishes policy, cultural policy, community policy for the city. Kind of talk about that a little bit more, because that has certainly been key in some of the relations that go on, especially with what's been happening in the country. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, what you're going to get from me as a police chief is one who's going to have honest dialogue about policing and the state of policing here in America. And it's no secret, there's been decades upon decades of police misconduct, racism in police departments, and now is this time, as I mentioned in the press release, that police chiefs have to set the tone for the organization. A police chief has to be willing to have the courage to change behavior and hold members accountable.
Yes, and certainly if more police and municipalities had that type of policy, I think that would definitely powerfully impact the country. Now, let's go back to the Minneapolis incident. That has sparked a national and international outrage. What were some of the fallacies of that particular police department? If we could sort of walk back what they should have done differently.
Well, what you witnessed with the death of Mr. George Floyd was murder. You had officers holding him down. You had an individual with his neck restrained by way of a knee. Mr. Floyd begged for his life, pleaded with the officer to allow him to breathe, and ultimately called for his mother. That was very disturbing to watch, but to answer your question, you also had police officers standing there watching this and did nothing. And so right away, looking at this atrocity, I did call for all of the members in the Southfield Police Department to meet with me. I met with the midnight shift, the day shift, the afternoon shift, and we had a discussion about how Mr. Floyd was murdered. And then we furthered the discussion with a policy that I've brought to this police department. It's called the duty to intervene. And what that means is, if you're there and you're watching this criminality or misconduct transpire and you do nothing to intervene, you will be held accountable just as though you had committed the act. And so here's the takeaway, Chris. When I met with these men and women of this organization, typically you have pushback, you have unions that come and try to change the thought process of the organization. But in this instance, it was a unified front. The unions, the police officers, and no matter the race, they all came to me and said, Chief, this is the right thing to do. We applaud you doing this, and we understand why this is necessary. And so again, I applaud those men and women who came to me and agreed that accountability was the right way to go to ensure that this police department exercises the best practices.
Now, we've had organized protests that have been happening in the community recently, and you have taken a very proactive stance with that, and not only in your responsibility as the face of Southfield law enforcement, but also as an African American man as well. What I thought was amazing with your stance on these protests, you've been able to march hand in hand with the protesters while balancing your position as a law enforcement professional. Kind of talk about that.
It was very important for the leadership to understand that we have to listen to the community. So let's talk about the recent protest over on Evergreen Road. I did meet with a young man, 24 years old, aspiring to make change. His name was Tom Calhoun. He organized a demonstration with about 50 young adults. When I say young adults, age ranging from 16 to 24. Well, they allowed me, as the police chief, to stand with them. They allowed me to speak with them, tell them how I responded to this incident, and then I was able to take questions from them because they were just as outraged as all of us are, Chris. And it was very important that they see a leader who separates himself from that type of behavior, sets the tone for the organization, and stands with them when it comes to police reform.
Mm-hmm. Now, with relation to the Minneapolis incident, what do you think are some of the major lessons learned?
Well, the leadership of the police department, you have to inspect what you expect. So the question that comes out of this, Chris, is what was the relationship with the police department in the community? Were supervisors out in the field monitoring behavior? And I'm going to tell you, Chris, because I always like to be candid, I'm doubtful that this is the first time that individual inflicted that type of unnecessary use of force. And the question comes, did supervisors see that in the past? Did other officers witness this type of behavior in the past? And if so, what was done? This business of policing is very difficult as it is. But if you have leadership that's weak and afraid to correct and change behavior, that is the outcome. Someone will die.
You're a leading proponent on diversity training and how that could positively impact the public safety community and law enforcement professionals. Kind of talk about how you've been incorporating diversity training in the way in which local public safety professionals service the community.
Well, when you look at training, you always want to look at national best practices in training. And so just recently, in the month of January, we had mandatory unconscious bias training, all types of diversity training mandated for the department. And then moving forward, the training doesn't just stop right there. We're going to do practical exercises from lessons learned from the training that we're given in the months of June and August. So training has to be constant, it has to be consistent, and it has to be always evolving. You can't stay stagnated on any type of training. You always look for ways to enhance training by way of professionalism and, again, best practices.
You've laid a very strong foundation when it comes to interacting with the community and community policing in terms of Southfield's response to civil unrest. If we're going to sort of take a look at the next year or two, moving forward, what does that look like to you?
Well, we always want to start off with having relationships in the community. It's very important that police departments, you don't wait till there's an incident and then you want to start forming relationships with the community. That starts now. And so this police department, even prior to my arrival, had good relationships with the community. But as a police chief, it was my duty to enhance it, expand it, look at how the relationships are going. We'll use an example, the schools. What are we doing in the schools? What are the school resources officers doing? And so I'm very honored to say that officers are engaged with the youth. We have many different youth organization initiatives. For example, vaping training, driving while black, all types of different avenues of approach to gaining the trust of our youth. We also looked at our houses of worship, how we interacting with them, what type of communication do we have with them. And within 2 months of my arrival, we launched a active shooter training, giving houses of worship plans, ideas on how to survive those attacks. So it's about constantly engaging with the community to ensure that there's a line of communication, there's access to the leadership of the police department, and then the community will have trust. If there's an incident, they'll give you time to gather the information, as long as you do it with speed and precision, and then be honest with the citizens. This is what it is. This is what I'm doing. So if we have to hold members accountable, do it. If we need to explain our actions and why we did what we did, then we'll do that. But it has to be trust, honesty, and courage of a police chief to make the corrections.
You've gone out of your way to praise your team because in order for a lot of these initiatives to be implemented and instituted and actually enacted in the community, you need buy-in. How have you been able to get that buy-in from your team in such a collaborative and cooperative way?
Well, one thing I pride myself on is being a communicator with the city officials, a communicator with the residents of the city, and also a communicator of the police officers. So I do spend time. I've established a police officer advisory board where our officers meet with me on a quarterly basis. They, as I always say, let me hear your ideas. The generations of police officers today, they're very intelligent. They have a lot of good ideas, and it's important for the leadership to listen to some of those ideas and incorporate that into the plans and goals of an organization. So I applaud the men and women of the Southfield Police Department, their professionalism and their willingness to accept the leadership and make the necessary corrections.
Now, moving forward, especially as it pertains to youth, millennials of color, when it comes to community policing, what do you want them to take away and to know about the Southfield Police Department?
Well, starting off, Chris, I've been in conversations with City Council President Lloyd Cruz, also Mr. Jay Hawkins, where we're looking to launch a youth advisory board. So we early in discussions, but when we launch this initiative, it's going to be big. We want to call on the youth because we need to hear from them. Right now, they're hurting. Right now, they're confused, and the idea is to give them a platform to speak with the police department, speak with the police chief. Let's have these honest discussions. Ask me the tough questions because you're going to get an honest answer. So it's important that we get this established, and when we get it established, this will be a continuous process to ensure youth engagement. When you look at a lot of the initiatives that go on, oftentimes you see a lot of the same faces, which we applaud, but we need to connect with the youth because that is our future.
Now, cooperation and collaboration also extends to the elected leadership of the city. Basically, talk about the dynamic of cooperation that you've gotten from them as well.
Well, one thing I have to applaud the elected officials. I guess I can start with the mayor. I've been a huge supporter. All the council members giving me an opportunity to lead this great organization. And I've mentioned that word, Chris, communication. And so by me being very responsive to our elected officials when they have questions, concerns, because they have to answer to their constituents. And so I receive their complaints, I do investigations, and then I do follow-up. Follow-up not just to the elected officials, but also to the residents who have concerns. And again, doing the follow-up, having the dialogue, having an open line of communication does increase the community outreach and community engagement.
You've introduced a lot of new and positive dynamics into the city of Southfield. Give us what your mantra is. What's your philosophy? If you could narrow it down to a quote that colors your sensibilities when it comes to engaging with the Southfield community, but also giving effective public safety service.
Well, no police department can be effective, can be trustworthy if you do not have relationships with the community. And so it's very important that modern day police chiefs, the days are gone when you can just sit in a office on a throne. You have to be out in the community. You have to know who the residents are. They need to know who you are. And that is how policing happens today if you want policing to be effective. Police chiefs, police officers engaged and invested in the community will go a long way to establish community trust.
Absolutely. Was there something that we may have missed that you want the community to know either about you as chief or the Southfield Police Department moving forward?
Well, Chris, I'm approaching my 1 year anniversary in July. Actually, July 29th will be 1 year. And what I want this community to know, you do have a police chief who has the courage to make change. You have a police chief who understands the importance of community relationships, community involvement, and you also have a police chief who understands the importance of accountability. Without accountability, that's when organizations tend to go wrong. So I just want to thank the Southfield community. You've been wonderful to me. You gave me an opportunity. You've been patient with me. And thank you for all of the welcoming remarks as my tenure is approaching 1 year.
All right. Well, as always, Chief, we thank you for having this conversation with us, and best of luck on many of the amazing initiatives that you have moving forward. And we're going to have you back on, so come on down.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
All right. You can keep track of us by going to our Facebook page, Southfield Multimedia Services, or on YouTube, Southfield Multimedia Services, in addition to the channel. Come back with us next time.